If you own a rental property in Portland, somebody has probably told you that the city has its own rent cap, stricter than the rest of Oregon's. That's not true. Portland does not have a rent cap, and under state law, it isn't allowed to have one. What Portland has instead is a rule that can cost you $4,500 per unit, and it is triggered by things that have nothing to do with the percentage you put on a rent increase notice. Non-renewals, terminations, a remodel, the landlords who get hurt by it are almost never the ones who are worried about the rent cap in the first place. I'm Jenny Turner with Lovejoy Real Estate in Portland, and let's talk a little bit about real estate. And I'm here to make sure that you don't regret the house that you buy or sell. So let's get into it. Quick disclaimer, before I go any further, I am a real estate broker. I am not an attorney, and nothing in this video is legal advice. Everything I'm about to walk you through comes from 4 places: the Oregon Department of Administrative Services, which calculates the annual cap; Oregon Revised Statutes, Chapter 90, specifically 90.323, 90.324, and 90.427. ORS 91.225, which is the preemption statute, and the Portland City Codes 30-1-085, plus the Portland Housing Bureau's program page for all of it. All of these are linked in the description, and I would rather you read them than take my word for any of it, because obviously that's a lot. But let's get into it and let me walk you through what I'm talking about. If you are sitting on a notice you have already drafted, or a tenant just handed you a request for relocation money, stop watching and call a landlord-tenant attorney today. The penalty in the city ordinance is up to 3 times the monthly rent, plus actual damages, plus the tenant's attorney fees. That's not a good week to be figuring this out from a video. Here's a story that circulates. Oregon caps rent increases statewide at 9.5% this year. And then Portland stacks something extra on top of that pulls the real number down for city landlords. So in Portland, owners should plan lower than everyone else. That's the story. Every part of that is wrong except for the 9.5%. So the question this video answers is this: if you own or manage rental property inside Portland city limits, what is your actual exposure and where does it actually come from? Because I think Portland landlords are watching the wrong number. So let's start there. Where does the 9.5% come from, and why does 2023 hit 14.6%? Let's build the state cap from the ground up because the history explains the number. Senate Bill 608 in 2019 created Oregon's rent stabilization system. It set the annual maximum at 7% plus inflation. And here's the part people forget. That original law had no upper limit. None. Whatever 7 plus CPI worked out to, that was the cap, which was fine until inflation was not fine. In 2023, the formula spit out 14.6%, which is not a cap so much as a suggestion. So the legislature came back. Senate Bill 611, passed in 2023, is what added the 10% hard ceiling, not 2019, 2023. If you have heard that Oregon has had a 10% ceiling since the beginning, that's off by 4 years, and the 4 years in between are exactly the years that made the ceiling necessary. Today, the formula reads the lesser of 10% or 7% plus the September 12th average change in the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, West regions, all items. CPI. Department of Administrative Services runs that calculation and has to publish it by September 30th every year for the following calendar year. For 2026, they published on September 30th of last year, and the number came in at 9.5%. For 2025, it was 10.0, and for 2024, it was 10.0 as well, both of them penned against the SB 611 ceiling. So 9.5 is generally the first time in a few years that the formula, not the ceiling, has been doing the work. One footnote that matters if it applies to you. There is a separate track for manufactured dwelling parks and marina tenancies in facilities with more than 30 spaces. And that number is 6% for 2026, not 9.5. That came out of House Bill 3054 in 2025. Different property type, different statute, different number. And mark your calendar. The 2027 figure is due by September 30th of this year. So the number I am giving you has a real expiration date on it. Part 2, the rules around the number. The percentage is the part everyone quotes. The rules around it, though, are the part that actually generates lawsuits. You cannot raise a rent at all during the first year of tenancy, not by 9.5%, not by 1%. The clock starts when the tenancy starts. After that first year, you get one increase per 12-month period. One, not one per lease, one per 12 months. So don't waste your increase. 90 days written notice every time. And I want to be specific here because I have heard this one repeated wrong. There is no longer a notice period for a bigger increase. The draft of the script said there was, and there's not. 90 days is 90 days, whether you are raising rent by 1% or the full 9.5%. What changes with a larger increase is not the timing, it is the content. If you are going above the cap because you qualify for an exemption, ORS 90.323 subsection 3C requires the notice to state the facts supporting that exemption. So same calendar, just more paperwork. Then there is the exemption itself, and the most consequential sentence in the whole statute. If the first certificate of occupancy for the unit was issued less than 15 years before the date of your first rent increase notice, the percentage cap does not apply to you at all. That is measured on a rolling basis from the certificate of occupancy to the notice date, so buildings age into coverage. A building that was exempt in 2024 may not be exempt in 2027. The thinking behind the carve-out, as I understand it, was to preserve the incentive to build new rental housing, though I will flag that as a reasoning people give, not something that the statute says out loud. Last one, there is no banking. If you skipped an increase last year or took less than the maximum, you cannot add the unused portion to it this year. Each 12-month window stands on its own, and there is no carry-forward provision anywhere in ORS 90.323. If you are coming into Oregon from a market where banking is normal, that assumption will quietly cost you money. Part 3, Portland cannot have its own rent cap. Now the correction, because this is the whole reason that I wanted to do this video today. ORS 90.225 says that rent control is a matter of statewide concern, and that the city shall not enact any ordinance or resolution which controls the rent that may be charged for the rent of any dwelling unit. That statute has been on the books since 1985. It applies throughout the state and in every city and county in it. So 9.5% is the number in Portland. It's also the number in Bend, in Medford, in Baker City. Same cap, same statute, same year. There is no separate Portland ceiling. There is no unwritten 9%, and a Portland landlord who takes the full 9.5% on a cap-covered unit with proper notice has done nothing wrong. Here's where it gets interesting. Portland's Relocation Assistance Ordinance was challenged on exactly this ground, and it survived. In Owen versus the City of Portland in 2021, the Oregon Supreme Court held that requiring a landlord to pay relocation assistance does not control the rent a landlord may charge, so the ordinance is not preempted. Read that holding closely and you get the design principle. Portland's rule is legal precisely because it does not touch your rent. It touches what a move costs. So part 4, what does Portland actually have in City Code 30.1.085? Portland Rental Additional Protections, administrated by the Portland Housing Bureau as mandatory rental relocation assistance. What is it? Now, quick naming note while we're here, because I have seen our own industry get this wrong. 30.01.85 is the relocation ordinance. It is not the FAIR ordinance. FAIR, fair access and renting, is a different part of code section 30.01.86 on the applicant screening and 30.01.87 on security deposits. Different rules, different penalties. If someone tells you that the FAIR ordinance made them pay relocation money, they are describing the wrong section. Here are the amounts, and I'm going to say them out loud because this is the single most useful fact in the video. $2,900 for a studio or single room occupancy unit, $3,300 for a 1-bedroom, $4,200 for a 2-bedroom, or $4,500 for a 3-bedroom or larger, per dwelling unit, not per tenant. 5 things trigger this relocation fee per the Housing Bureau: a no-cause eviction, a notice of non-renewal on a fixed-term lease, a qualifying landlord reason for termination, a rent increase of 10% or more over a 12-month period, and a substantial change of lease terms. It does not apply to for-cause terminations, to week-to-week tenancies, or where the tenant lives in the same unit as a landlord. The mechanics differ depending on which trigger you hit, and this is the part I had to read 4 separate times before I trusted myself on the order of operations. It's a little confusing. On a termination, the payment is not optional and it is not late. 90 days notice minimum, and the relocation money has to be in the tenant's hands at least 45 days before the termination date. Not at move out, 45 days before move out date. On a rent increase, it works differently. The tenant has 45 calendar days from receiving the notice to request relocation assistance in writing. If they ask, you pay within 31 days. Then the tenant has 6 months from the effective date of the increase to either hand the money back and stay at the new rent or give notice and move. Does that make sense? Let's do that again. So if the tenants ask for relocation, you have to pay within 31 days. Then the tenant has 6 months from the effective date of the increase to either give the money back and stay at the new rent amount or give notice and move. And there is, of course, paperwork on top. Every termination notice, every increase notice, and every relocation payment has to include a written description of the tenant's rights and the amount they are eligible for. You also have to notify the Housing Bureau within 30 days of making a payment. One more Portland-only detail: inside city limits, any increase of 5% or more requires 90 days notice, or whatever your rental agreement says, whichever is longer. So part 5, the arithmetic that is actually the story. Now let's put those two numbers together. State cap for 2026, 9.5%. Portland's relocation trigger, 10% or more. 9.5 is less than 10, which means if your unit is covered by the state cap, you physically cannot reach Portland's relocation trigger with a legal rent increase this year. The state cap stops you at a half point short. Take the full maximum, follow the notice rules, and you owe nobody relocation assistance. The rule everybody warns Portland landlords about does not apply to landlords who are actually worried about it. So who does it apply to? The units the cap does not cover: new construction, first certificate of occupancy less than 15 years old. These owners can legally go above 10%. And inside Portland, that is exactly where the relocation trigger lives. Picture someone we'll call Marcus. Hypothetical. Marcus owns a 2-bedroom condo in a building that got a certificate of occupancy in 2016. 10 years old, so the state percentage cap does not apply to him at all, and he knows it. His property manager tells him he could go to 12% and be fully within state law, which is true. Neither of them checks that the unit is inside Portland city limits. He sends the notice. Within 45 days, his tenant sends a written request for relocation assistance, and Marcus owes $4,200 within 31 days. He was right about the state law, and it did not help him. And notice that rent increases are only one of 5 triggers. Here's the more common one. Picture someone we'll call Diane. Also hypothetical. Diane owns one older fourplex in inner Northeast Portland, and it needs work that genuinely cannot happen with people living in it. Oregon law does allow her to terminate for that, but the standard is narrower than people think. Under ORS 90.427(5)b, the unit has to be unsafe or unfit for occupancy, or become unsafe or unfit during work. I want to empty it so it shows better is not a qualifying reason. Assuming Diane clears that bar, state law normally requires a landlord terminating for a qualifying reason to hand the tenant 1 month's rent at the time the notice moves out. Let's assume she clears that bar. State law also normally requires a landlord terminating for a qualifying reason to hand the tenant 1 month's rent at the time the notice goes out. Diane owns 4 units total, and that state payment is waived for landlords with an ownership interest in 4 or fewer dwellings. Good news, briefly, for Diane. Except the city payment is separate and it is not waived. She is a non-resident owner of a fourplex, so none of the 12 exemptions in the ordinance reach her, and most of the exemptions require an approved application and an acknowledgement letter from the Housing Bureau in advance anyways. And here's the sting in the tail. The ordinance lets a landlord reduce the city payment by a state payment when both are paid together as a single payment. Diane has no state payment to offset against, so the waiver she qualified is for the reason that she gets no discount. 4 units, $4,500 each if they are 3 bedrooms, and that is the renovation line item that she has to fund before the first tenant moves out, not after. While we are on qualifying reasons, one more correction worth clarifying. A sale is not a qualifying reason just because you listed the property. You have to have an accepted offer on that unit separately from any other unit, from a buyer who intends in good faith to live there, and you have to deliver that notice plus written evidence of that offer to the tenant within 120 days of accepting it. Demolition or conversion to non-residence use also qualifies, but listing your property for sale does not. Real question for you, and I want actual answers in the comments. Before this video, did you believe Portland had its own rent cap? Because I think the belief is genuinely widespread, and I would like to know where people are picking it up. National landlord forums, a property management, a closing escrow agent, somewhere else? Tell me, because whatever the source is, sending the wrong owners into a panic and letting the right ones walk into a bill is what we'll really see happening. If you own rental property or you are looking at buying one anywhere in the greater Portland, Salem, Eugene, or Southwest Washington area, my team can walk you through how these rules generally apply to a specific property and tell you at what point you need an attorney rather than a broker. No pressure, no obligation. And if your move takes you somewhere we do not work, I have a referral network of agents I have either worked with directly or vetted personally, and I am happy to make an introduction. I have rental property in the city of Portland, so I definitely understand this, but I will tell you it's a moving target and we really have to pay attention daily. So let's just summarize with what is your actual exposure by situation. If you own a cap-covered rental inside Portland, Meaning the building is 15 years or older, 9.5% is your real ceiling this year, same as everywhere else in Oregon. Take it if the market supports it. You cannot trigger relocation assistance with a rent increase at that number. Your exposure is on the termination side, not the increase side. If you own newer construction inside Portland, under 15 years from the first certificate of occupancy, you are the one the ordinance is actually aimed at. You are exempt from the state percentage cap, and you are fully inside the city's 10% trigger. Know which side of the city line the address sits on before you draft anything. If you own outside Portland city limits, including unincorporated Multnomah County, 9.5% is your ceiling, and the Portland ordinance does not reach you. Whether the city you are actually in has adopted something of its own is worth confirming rather than assuming. I did not verify every jurisdiction in the metro, and I am not going to pretend that I did. If you are buying an investment property, ask one specific question before you write the offer. Is this address inside the Portland city limits, and what year was the certificate of occupancy issued? Those two facts together which determine which set of rules you are buying into. PortlandMaps.com will answer the first one in about 10 seconds. If you are planning a renovation or a family move-in, budget relocation assistance as a hard line item, and check whether your situation is one of 12 exemptions, because most of them require you to file with the Housing Bureau and get an acknowledgement letter before the fact. After the fact is too late. If you are a tenant watching this, the money is not automatic on a rent increase. You have 45 days from the notice to request it in writing, and if you take it, you either repay it or move within 6 months. 3 things changed if you came in believing the common version. 1, Portland has no rent cap and cannot have one because state law preempts it. 2, the 10% hard ceiling on the state formula is from 2023, not 2019, which is why the 2023 cap was 14.6. And 3, Portland's real cost is the relocation ordinance, $2,900 to $4,500 a unit, and for most cap-covered landlords, it will never be a rent increase that sets it off. It will be a termination or a non-renewal. Know which building you own before you send anything, and if you already are holding a notice, call an attorney today, not after the tenant does. If this cleared something up, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Send it to any landlord you know inside the city limits. Our contact information is right below this video. I'm Jenny Turner with Lovejoy Real Estate out in Portland. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.